Kate Blanchett is a very good actress, and she got the hair, the makeup, the wardrobe, and a lot of other details are spot on accurate. But I'm afraid what she missed was my mother's inner life. She missed her deep faith in God as really the foundation of what she did. She missed that she presents my mother as power mad and cold and calculating and dismissive to her own supporters, and that really missed her warmth. I was um, I was talking to one of my cousins a couple of weeks ago who had not seen it, and this is a cousin who is way as doesn't agree with a single thing my mother said. But she said to me, "Well, I hope they get her charisma right because your mother was so charismatic," and I think they missed that because in the style, in the way she is so condescending to her own supporters, as played by Kate Blanchett, I think missed really what I call Phyllis the Encourager, because she led a movement of women, volunteer women, and they were loyal to Phyllis because Phyllis was loyal to them.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. They definitely portray her as power hungry. That is a an absolute plot. Uh, that is an absolute plot, I guess, essential in this script. That
Mhm.
that you're right. Kate Blanchett is executing, and she's executing it very well. You're because we're clearly getting that that was her primary motivation.
Her
Um,
primary motivation was to save the country. You see, everything she did, she genuinely believed it. It was not a put on or an act.
yeah, because what is occurring, and this is for our listeners that have not seen this yet. What is occurring in this script is they are painting her out to be someone who, in many ways, had political aspirations of her own and felt not liberated enough. This is how they portray her. Felt not liberated enough to follow those political aspirations. So she goes and does this in its replacement. Would you say that's what this show is portraying her? Is that pretty clear how they're portraying her?
Yeah, yes, because I think it's their idea of what would be the inner life of Phyllis Schlafly, as opposed to finding what she truly motivated her. They overlaid what how they think they would have acted had they been in her situation. And my mother never felt as though she wasn't liberated or free to do what she wanted to do. After all, what she said was that there was only one person in her life she had to please, and that was her husband. She had no boss or employer or anybody else that she had to kowtow to. And as long as she pleased her husband, she felt liberated to do whatever she wanted to do, whether it was to run for Congress a couple of times, start a new organization, change the trajectory of our constitutional amendment process. I mean, she was free to do it.
Uh, it's really interesting to me. Was there anything other than, so they really got her faith wrong. In fact, they don't even portray her faith at all.
Well, at one point, in one scene, she is seen in a confessional arguing with God. And I do take exception to that because that was not a depiction of of her belief. I mean, she was a devout Roman Catholic who prayed the rosary every day and had great solace in the prayer that she did.
So interesting. Um, Another part is her relationship to her son.
Mhm.
I would guess your older brother. Was that true, or did they falsely portray that as well?
Well, my brother was outed as homosexual in 1992. So it's factually true that he is homosexual. I think my mother had, because of her deep faith,
Right.
she had a hard time believing it was true.
Right.
She did an interview a couple of years before she died where she said in the interview, I don't believe he's gay. And I think for my mother, when she was faced with things that she didn't like, she usually put it away, ignored it, and went on to something that she did like.
Yeah.
I'm not sure she ever felt about it or dealt with it or spent a lot of time on it. She just hoped that he would find some nice girl to marry eventually.
Well, I think that's a generational thing for sure. What are anything else that you found that wasn't true in this Mrs. America fictionalized Phyllis Schlafly portrayal?
Well, look at the way they portray marriage and fidelity. The sex within marriage is nasty, brutish, and short. The sex outside of marriage is thrilling and exciting. And I felt in many ways the sex scenes were an attack on fidelity. Now, my mother, she signed every letter, faithfully Phyllis. She considered being faithful and loyal to be a primary virtue and something to do and to emulate. And her faithfulness within her marriage was very important as part of her marriage vows. And so I think what you end up seeing is the unfaithful sex, the cheating on your boyfriend that Gloria Steinem does in one scene, or the cheating on the spouse that Brenda Fastow does in another scene, is presented as, oh, isn't this fun and exciting, as opposed to their slam on my parents' marriage. Yeah. And my parents had really quite a loving marriage. That my father was not an insensitive brute. I mean, more than anything, they were two peas in a pod.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me. Did they reach out to?
Oh, no. Are you kidding me? They had their own agenda. I reached out to them, but the producer has been quoted recently as saying she very much did not want to be influenced by any family member.
Oh, is that correct? So they didn't want to. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. It's clear to me that Hollywood has it would be great if they presented the past in a fair and accurate way, but they just can't seem to do it.
Well, the producer has said that she had an agenda with this. She decided to take on this topic because she looked in 2016, because she thought we would be having our first female president, and this would be a time to look at women, the women's movement of the 1970s. And then when Hillary Clinton was not elected, she then decided that the show was even more important and make it into a darker turn. And of course, this 9-part series does get very dark in the later episodes.
Yeah, I haven't watched the last episode I saw was the Sarah Paulson composite figure. And I don't know if you got to read, there was a great article in Variety, and I retweeted it out and tagged Sarah. If you follow me on Twitter, you can see it, where Sarah talks about, she plays Phyllis's best friend in this. And like
fictionalized.
It was a composite character. And she really talks about how this person sees women on the other side as evil, and then gets to know them, and then realizes, has this change of heart. And it's interesting that I think I like the way Sarah approached it, because you hardly hear anybody talking in ways where it sounds like both sides are human beings. It's usually one side is evil and one side is good. But Sarah really talks about the, you know, both sides, and all the women being really extraordinary in that time and in that era, which I thought was really great. But you don't see that much. So I think it's a really good article. One of the only ones I've seen on Mrs. America. Did you, what do you think of the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment?
Well, the Equal Rights Amendment is presented as a feel-good amendment that would allegedly put women in the Constitution. But ERA never mentions women. It only mentions sex, and sex has a different meaning from women, and it would not give women any benefit. It certainly didn't in the 1970s when it was much debated.
Yeah.
And now that the definition of sex is so dramatically changed today, I think it would be even more detrimental today than the unintended consequences are there for everyone to see. Because right now in front of the Supreme Court are a couple of cases deciding what is the definition of sex in Title VII. And so if we don't know what the definition of sex is, then really ERA is a can of worms that will have to be decided by courts. And it's a cheat on the American people to put something in the Constitution that no one has a clear understanding of.
You have such a strong opinion. Do you do political work? Do you do any?
Well, my mother founded the organization Eagle Forum in the mid-1970s in the midst of this battle to fight against the Equal Rights Amendment. And I have the honor of being chairman of that organization today.
Congratulations. You sound as charismatic as your mother, and she was an extraordinary woman. Anything else you want to add before we wrap it up about the show, or anything moving forward?
Well, although I disagree with a lot of elements in the show, it is an opportunity to explore and introduce this time period to younger women who anyone younger than I am isn't going to really know this extraordinary time period. And it really was something else. And think of it. My mother lived in a small town in the middle of flyover land, and yet 4 years after her death, we're still talking about her. She never held any government position, and everything she did from her kitchen table. So I think it's a story that we all can get inspiration from, because she was a role model to so many women. And whether you would agree with her or not, she was a force. And why shouldn't we all be such a tremendous force in our lives?
Well, that's the one thing that I think they do get right. The force of this woman was extraordinary, and you mentioned her charisma. They didn't really capture it, but they definitely capture this woman's force of nature, and she really was. So, Anne, I really appreciate your time with me today, and it was a great conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome, Michelle.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on.